Greetings, fellow readers and story lovers, and welcome back to my channel. My name's Jay, and we are still talking about Shakespeare, specifically about the opening scene of one of his most famous tragedies, Romeo and Juliet. So let's dive right on in, shall we? If you've missed my two previous videos, here's the Cliff Notes version. Scene 1 of Act 1 opens with two Capulet servants joking about their master's feud with the Montagues. Their banter and pun-heavy language show both how ridiculous this feud is and how deep it runs. We're then introduced to one family member of either house, Benvolio, who is Romeo's cousin, and Tybalt, who's the son of Lady Capulet's brother, so Juliet's cousin. The two act as foil characters, with Tybalt being hot-headed and aggressive, while Benvolio tries to keep the peace. Tybalt attacks Benvolio, and then a fight in the streets breaks out, involving several members of both families and even some of Verona's citizens. The chaos only ends when the prince, the ruler of Verona, steps in and declares that whoever starts the next fight will be sentenced to death. This moment raises the stakes, creates a sense of dramatic irony, since we already know the story isn't going to end well, and shows just how deeply violence is woven into Verona as a city. The prince literally calls the citizens beasts when they won't stop fighting, even as he steps onto the scene. It's a perfect snapshot of the kind of place Verona is, a city ruled by conflict and chaos. All right, now that I've brought one and all up to speed, let's talk about Romeo. Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? I know, it's technically a line from later on in the play, Act 2, Scene 2 to be precise, the famous balcony scene, which we will talk about in great detail in some of the later videos. But why do you have to be Romeo is actually a very good question to ask here, because if Romeo weren't Romeo, then the play might not happen the way it does. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about what's actually going on in this scene, because let me tell you, it's a lot. First things first, we're introduced to Romeo not through his words or his actions, but through other characters talking about him. So after the prince has made his decree and everyone else has buggered off, we're left with Lord and Lady Montague and Benvolio on stage. And they start talking about Romeo and his strange change in behavior as of late. So not only are we not introduced to the character by his immediate appearance on stage, but we're also learning about his state of mind first. This is more than just a little unusual. Remember, the servants are introduced through their banter. Benvolio immediately tries to break up the fighting. Tybalt comes in with his sword drawn. Everyone else we've met so far has been defined through their actions, not Romeo. Why is that, do you think? Well, I can think of at least two reasons. One, it primes the audience for his arrival, heightens the tension a little. And two, it puts his emotions front and center. And that tells you almost immediately what Romeo is going to be all about. He's a character whose feelings are going to drive the plot above all else. But let's look at what it is that we actually learn about him. Benvolio explains to Lord and Lady Montague that he saw Romeo earlier that morning, sitting alone under a tree, and when he tried to approach him, he says that Romeo was ware of me and stole into the covert of the woods. Clearly, Romeo wants to be left alone. Lord Montague goes on to say, many a morning hath he there been seen, he means by the woods, with tears augmenting the fresh morning's dew, adding clouds to more clouds with his deep sighs. So not only does he want to be left alone, but he's also very emotional. Crying and sighing are clearly his go-to emotional responses. A little bit further on, his father says, away from the light steals home my heavy son, and private in his chamber pens himself, shuts up his windows, locks fair daylight out, and makes himself an artificial night. This paints Romeo as this very sad and wistful character. The description Lord Montague gives here, heavy sun, locks fair daylight out, makes himself an artificial night, actually made me think of how people talk about depression. You know, locking yourself in your room, blocking the sunlight out, avoiding company. Clearly, Daddy Montague is worried. But I'd also like to point something else out, and that is the language that Lord Montague uses. His tone and diction are very somber and almost melancholic. He calls Romeo his heavy son and says that Romeo pens himself in his chamber. All of this characterizes Romeo, yes, but it also signals something else: his social status. And by his here, I mean Lord Montague. Because Lord Montague is a nobleman, so he speaks in verse, in proper iambic pentameter. Remember in the first video I did on this scene, I said that the servants talk in prose and that marks their lower social class? Well, this is the opposite. Iambic means the stress falls on every second syllable, so the rhythm is unstressed, stressed, and pentameter means there are 5 stressed beats per line. If we do it in a slightly exaggerated manner, it would read, "Away from the light steals home my heavy son." It's a very poetic way of speaking because it makes the lines sound very rhythmic and melodic, which also tends to help actors remember them more easily. I remember David Tennant saying in an interview once that he had to improvise Shakespeare when he forgot his lines, which he was able to do precisely because they're written this way. As long as you stick to iambic pentameter, it will always sound like Shakespeare to the audience. So yes, iambic pentameter, very Shakespeare. You know what else is very Shakespeare? Lines absolutely packed with imagery. Let's take a look at that, shall we? In line 126, Lord Montague says that Romeo's tears are augmenting, which means adding to, the fresh morning's dew. On the surface, it's simply telling us that Romeo cries in the morning, but metaphorically, it blends his emotions with nature. His tears don't just fall, they merge with the world around him and literally become part of the landscape. On the one hand, this places human emotions on the same level as the natural world. Feelings are both natural and a natural force on their own. It also tells us something very specific about Romeo. His emotions spill outward, they're visible, and they color his surroundings. In the next line, Montague says that Romeo adds clouds to more clouds with his deep sighs. Now, this is both a metaphor and slightly hyperbolic. Obviously, Romeo isn't literally controlling the weather, but his mood is so intense that it almost feels like he could. His sighs are so constant and so dramatic, they might as well darken the sky. Shakespeare isn't subtle here. When Romeo feels, he feels on a grand scale. His emotions are larger than life. And then we get the light versus darkness symbolism in the next lines. Romeo moves away from the light and retreats into darkness. Again, Shakespeare is not being delicate here. Light and darkness almost always carry symbolic meaning, and Shakespeare leans into that here. In this case, light represents openness, clarity, life, and social connection. In short, all things that Juliet will come to stand for. In fact, when Romeo first talks about Juliet in Act 1, Scene 5, he says that she doth teach the torches to burn bright. She literally outshines the light around her. Darkness, by contrast, is tied to isolation, introspection, and emotional turmoil, everything Romeo is currently drowning in. So when he makes himself an artificial night, he's not just being melodramatic. Though, let's be clear, he is the absolute poster child of melodrama. But Shakespeare is also showing us that Romeo naturally gravitates towards emotional extremes. He feels things deeply, intensely, and immediately. And that is going to matter a lot later on. So, before Romeo even steps on stage, we get a shockingly complete picture of who he is. He's solitary, wistful, impulsive, and completely driven by his emotions. And that first impression? Well, it's basically foreshadowing the entire rest of the play. From falling in love with Juliet at first sight, to marrying her just 24 hours later, to killing Tybalt in a blind rage, to killing himself when he believes that Juliet is gone. Romeo is a character who's all heart and no thought. And that is what drives the plot. His emotions aren't just part of his character, they're the very heart of the play. And when he does come on stage, oh boy, does he not disappoint. Almost immediately, he tells Benvolio that he is out of her favor where I am in love, meaning that the girl he loves doesn't love him back. So now we have confirmation of what's been troubling him: unrequited love. And he wastes absolutely no time lamenting to his cousin how absolutely agonizing this is for him. Listen to what he says. He has much to do with hate, but more with love. Why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first create, O heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-meaning forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep that is not what it is. This love I feel, that feel no love in this. Couple of things I'd like to note. First, he's being very dramatic. You can practically picture him with a hand on his forehead collapsing dramatically into a chaise longue when he cries out, "Oh, anything of nothing first create." It's peak melodrama. Second, his speech is full of contradictions. He uses a whole string of oxymorons: brawling love, loving hate, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health. These are phrases that shouldn't logically fit together, but that's the point. Romeo's experience of love is chaotic and contradictory. And that makes sense. We learn a little bit later on in the play that he has never actually experienced love for himself, only read about it in books. So naturally, he has this very romanticized storybook notion of what love is supposed to feel like. But now that he actually is in love, or thinks he is, all he feels is misery. And he can't reconcile the dream with reality. Hence the contradictory language. It does something else too. It puts love on the same level as hate. Twice in his speech they appear in the very same line. He has much to do with hate, but more with love. And, oh brawling love, oh loving hate. So love and hate aren't presented as opposites here, but as two sides of the same coin. The scene as a whole reinforces this too. The language that Tybalt uses to talk about his hatred for the Montagues is just as passionate and intense as the language that Romeo uses to talk about the pain of his unrequited love. And it's not just this scene. The entire play follows this pattern. Tybalt and Mercutio die from hate. Romeo and Juliet die from love. The problem isn't one or the other. It's the intensity behind both. Both are irrational, both can escalate, and both can make you do stupid things with dangerous consequences. And that, my fellow readers and story lovers, is why Romeo and Juliet is not a love story. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when either love or hate goes too far. Now, there's one more thing I'd like to mention before I sign off, and that is the contradiction between what our oh-so-lovesick Romeo says here and what he later on does. Here's how he describes love to his cousin Benvolio. Love is a smoke raised with fume of sighs, being purged a fire sparkling in lover's eyes, being vexed a sea nourished with lover's tears. What is it else? A madness most discreet, a choking gall, and a preserving sweet. Again, we get contradiction after contradiction. Love is both smoke and fire, it is the sea, and it is both poison, a choking gall, and medicine, a preserving sweet. But what Romeo is saying, most of all, is that love is a slow, sweet agony. This ties back to the concept of courtly love, a prevalent idea in Shakespeare's time, where the man was supposed to adore the woman from afar while she remained cold and distant at first before eventually giving in to his affections. In this sense, Romeo is supposed to suffer at this stage. It's a sign of true passion. However, when he first sees Juliet at the Capulet ball in Act 1, Scene 5, he falls head over heels in love with her. And proper courtship goes straight out the window. This is Romeo's impulsive nature in action, and we already know from the prologue that it's going to have disastrous consequences for both him and Juliet. All right, this is where I leave you, my fellow readers and story lovers. We've officially made it to the end of Act 1, Scene 1. Let's quickly summarize not just what we covered in this video, but also the key points of the other two videos as well. The opening scene of Romeo and Juliet introduces us to three of the play's most important themes: violence versus peace. We see this immediately in the street brawl, a perfect example of how quickly violence can escalate in Verona. We also see it in the contrast between Tybalt and Benvolio. One seeks out conflict, the other tries to prevent it. Benvolio doesn't seem particularly successful here, but he is one of the few characters who survive the play, which does tell you something. 2. Hate versus love. The scene opens with the feud between the Capulets and the Montagues and closes with Romeo passionately lamenting about the pain of love. This pairing shows us that love and hate are not opposites. They're two equally destructive forces. Fate and inevitability. The street brawl both foreshadows and actively causes the play's tragic ending. The characters are already so entrenched in this feud that not even Romeo and Juliet's love later on can stop it. And because this is the third outbreak of public violence, the prince makes his decree, which raises the stakes and sets the stage for Romeo's later banishment. This shows that fate is already working against the main characters. And finally, this scene introduces us to Romeo himself, a young man completely governed by his passion, his emotions, and his impulsive nature. And as we know, this is going to have severe consequences for the rest of the play. So there you have it, folks. That's the entirety of the first scene in a nutshell. Next time, we'll take a look at Act 1, Scene 5, the moment when Romeo and Juliet first meet. There's going to be a lot to talk about there, but for now, this is me, signing off. Oh, I actually made it through this in one go, which raises a stake. We see this immediately in the street ball. Street ball? Daddy Montague is worried. Can I say daddy here? Oh, I'm rolling with it. But his mood is so intense that it almost lost my line. Romeo naturally gravitates towards emotional. The street ball again. Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, share, and comment down below. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you don't want to miss any of my future videos. I also have a Patreon that you can subscribe to, starting at as little as $2 a month, which gives you early access to any of my videos. Higher tiers include access to exclusive Patreon-only content and the chance to suggest books, plays, or poems for any future analysis. For now, that is it from me, and I'll see you next time.